Hello and welcome to this special report here at XM.com. We'll be discussing the upcoming U.S. elections and how it matters for the markets. I'm Maria Bashardez, and joining me is lead market analyst Rafi Boyadjian. So Rafi, the race between Trump and Harris seems to be getting tighter as November 5th quickly approaches. Can you tell us in a nutshell, what are the key policy differences between the two candidates?
Well, Maria, I think it's safe to say that the key differences are really on tax and the economy. So we know that Trump and the Republicans in general favor lower taxes. So Trump really wants to extend those tax cuts he had introduced back during his first term in 2017. They're set to expire in 2025. So he wants to extend those cuts, and he also wants to cut the corporate tax rate further from 21 to 15%. But it's not really a clear-cut thing because, say, for example, with the corporate tax rate, he's only proposing the cuts to apply to companies that make their goods in the US. So it's not quite clear how it would work. Whereas if we have a look at Kamala Harris's proposals, she has indicated that she would also favor extending the 2017 tax cuts, but not so much for the wealthy. So probably it would only apply to people earning less than $400,000 a year. But she's proposing help for lower income earners. For example, she wants to raise child tax credits. She also wants to help first-time home buyers. She's really targeting the people who have suffered the most from the cost of living crisis. Whereas with Trump, he really seems to be trying to help the rich and the bigger businesses. So quite a few differences there. On the whole, though, I think both candidates' policies will be adding to the national debt. So this is a bit of a concern. Trump's proposals, by most estimates, they do look set to raise the national debt a whole lot more than Kamala Harris' proposals. So this is one thing markets are kind of paying attention to, because the US already has a very high debt to GDP ratio, which exceeds 120%. So further increases in government borrowing might potentially trigger some kind of a debt crisis of the coming period of the next term or so. If we have a look at other policies, though, Trump seems to have the edge when it comes to immigration because of his tougher stance. We know that he's clearly opposed to having more migration or uncontrolled migration, whereas Kamala Harris, she did come under fire during the start of Biden's term, that she didn't do a good enough job of controlling the Mexican border, but she has since then also toughened up her stance. Whether she has gone far enough, that remains to be seen. And then on other issues, for example, on abortion, this is where Kamala Harris seems to have a slight lead, particularly when it comes to women voters. And maybe this is where Trump has potentially lost some voters. And then on other things, for example, climate change, we know that Trump is not really, someone who believes in climate change. But then again, we do have Elon Musk supporting his campaign. So potentially there's some deal there whereby Trump would not target electric vehicle makers or even support them. Kamala Harris and from Biden as well, we know that the Democrats in general, they do want to push the renewable energy agenda. The question is, Kamala Harris has been a little bit inconsistent in terms of how far she would go in terms of phasing out fossil fuels. So maybe her policies would not be quite as tough as they appear on the face of it. But these are pretty much the hot topics in this campaign.
So what would a Trump or Harris win mean for the dollar, stocks, commodities, and cryptos? What are markets most anxious about?
Well, it's interesting you should say that, because even before we've had the outcome of the elections, of course, in recent days, we have seen Trump really makes significant gains in the polls, and markets have taken note. Up until now, we hadn't seen a huge market reaction to the presidential election, but now that it's looking at least the risk of Trump returning to the White House is becoming a real risk. We are seeing a big jump in treasury yields. So people are selling US government bonds, and the reason why they're selling it is because they think inflation will be higher under Trump. And this is the higher yields are pushing the dollar higher. And this is pretty much the forecast that if Trump wins, we would end up with a stronger US dollar because his policies on not just on taxes, because of course tax cuts would boost growth. Trump, let's not forget, he wants to raise tariffs as well. He wants to raise them even further than what we saw during his first term. We could see tariffs on Chinese imports rise by as much as 60%. And this would be pretty inflationary for the US economy. And just as when the Fed has started to cut rates, they might be forced to go on pause or even start raising them again. So this is a concern for the markets. That's why we're seeing the dollar be so strong. Under Kamala Harris, probably we would end up with a weaker dollar. But again, let's not forget that if you put all of our policies in terms of supporting low-income workers and smaller businesses, maybe all those would have enough of an effect in boosting growth as well. So maybe we shouldn't get too carried away in terms of becoming too bearish about the dollar should Kamala Harris win. If we have a look at other assets, for example, commodities, it's an interesting one for, say, gold, which has really been scaling all-time highs lately. The stronger dollar doesn't bode well for gold's outlook, assuming Trump were to win. But then again, Trump does bring with him a lot of uncertainty because of his unpredictable nature, his foreign policy stance, and so on. So maybe those risks might end up offsetting the effects from the stronger US dollar. With Kamala Harris, on the other hand, I don't think a lot would change from how we have things at the moment. So that's also good for gold potentially. Oil, it's a bit more of a mixed outlook because we don't know, if Trump were to win, whether his looser stance on, oil and gas drilling, how much of a effect would that be in terms of dragging down oil prices on the expectation that under Trump, supply for oil and gas would increase. And then, of course, with Kamala Harris, renewable energy policies, how far would she go? Would that also mean disruptions to supply in the short term, which would potentially could push up oil prices? All of the things to consider there. It's not a clear-cut situation. For the stock market, I think on the whole, investors generally favor Trump because of his, lower tax policies, less regulation under the Republicans. But then again, we've got the risks of, just what kind of an effect would higher tariffs have, not just on inflation, but the economy in general. Would it really work in terms of bringing production back to the United States, or would it backfire? So I think initially during Trump's term, stocks would probably continue to rally, but then, once we start to see those tariffs come into effect, maybe the stock market would struggle a little bit. Whereas with Kamala Harris, for sure, stocks would not rally quite as much as under Trump. But then again, I don't think they would do badly either because, of course, I think Kamala Harris, there's less risk involved in terms of, say, her policies, her foreign policy, her in terms of the deficit as well. Although the deficit would rise under Harris, not quite as much as it would under Trump. At least that's what most analysts expect. So again, I think while on the whole, the stock market would probably do better under Trump, the difference this time around is probably not quite as much, say, in terms of Republican versus Democrats when it comes to the net boost for Wall Street. And then finally, I think it's worth mentioning cryptos because cryptos really had seen strong gains lately once we started to see Trump doing well again in the polls because, of course, Trump has all of a sudden become very pro-crypto, and a win for Trump would mean probably less regulation and also more acceptance of digital assets, whereas Kamala Harris, she definitely wants more regulation, but then this might not necessarily be a bad thing, because more regulation would actually help increase confidence in the crypto industry, in terms of users feeling like it's safe to trade cryptos because it is regulated. So we could potentially be looking at a bit of a win-win situation for the crypto industry, but definitely under Trump we could see a much stronger rally for cryptos such as Bitcoin.
And finally, what are the key swing states to watch, and what are investors most worried about?
Well, this is, I think, what investors are going to be focusing most in the coming days as we approach election day, because it is a very tight race. Now, when we first saw Kamala Harris enter the picture, she was for several weeks holding on to around about 2 percentage points lead against Trump. Now, that lead in nationwide polls has narrowed to less than 1 percentage point, and Trump is also edging up as well in the swing states, but it's still a very, very uncertain picture, because, for example, Trump seems to be doing well in the battleground states such as Arizona and North Carolina, whereas Harris does have a slight lead in states such as Nevada and Wisconsin, but then several others as well, such as Michigan, Pennsylvania, Georgia, where it's a very, very tight race. We don't have a clear winner. So probably, I think whoever wins, they're going to win by a very slim margin. The problem here is that if if Kamala Harris wins by a very small margin, I think we can be certain that that former president will try to contest the results. He will probably try to challenge the results in the courts. We might even also have a recount like we saw in the 2000 election when it was George Bush versus Al Gore. So we could end up with something similar this time around, and this could drag on for several weeks, if not months, and then this would create a lot of uncertainty for the markets, and we know that the markets don't like uncertainty.
Rafi, thanks so much. And thanks for joining us for this special report here at XM.com.